Have you ever stopped to think about how intrinsically horrifying it is to be hunted? Like, as a species? Today, we're sitting pretty. We've got our protected communities, our safe homes, and solid physical barriers between us and the wild. But that safety, it took countless generations to build. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, early humans would go out foraging only to literally be torn to shreds by short-faced bears. Or they'd come back to camp to find saber-toothed cats had attacked in the night. The reality is, we are incredibly blessed to live in an era where we aren't actively being hunted by apex predators. But what happens when that primal nightmare comes back? When an entire modernizing society suddenly wakes up and realizes they are back on the menu?
Let's be real for a second. Physically speaking, humans are kind of pushovers. We don't have sharp claws, we don't have giant teeth, and we definitely don't have armored skin. What we do have is our brains. Today, if a massive predator decided to attack a town, humanity could neutralize it in half a second with modern tech. But just a few hundred years ago, back in the 18th century, that was absolutely not the case. Sure, gunpowder was a thing, but muskets back then were incredibly inaccurate and they had a painfully slow reload time. Imagine coming face to face with an apex predator, like a highly aggressive bear or a massive wolf. If it could absorb your first initial shots with its dense muscle and bone, you were left completely defenseless. And that brings us directly to the terrifying reality faced by the people of rural France. So today, we are diving right into a true crime forensic breakdown of one of history's most terrifying unsolved mysteries. Between the years of 1764 and 1767, something was stalking the French countryside. It was a reign of terror so profound that it caught the attention of the king himself, sparked what was basically history's very first international media sensation, and left dozens of victims in its wake. In this explainer, we're going to sift through the evidence, profile the victims, and try to finally understand what exactly was the Beast of Gévaudan? Part 1. Terror in Gévaudan. Let's set the scene. Spring of 1764. Okay, let's dive into our crime scene. This whole nightmare started in Gévaudan, which is a heavily forested region down in southern France. The very first recorded attack was on a woman tending her cattle right near the tree line. According to her account, something just charged out of the woods. She said it looked kind of like a wolf, but it wasn't a wolf. Honestly, she only survived because her bulls fiercely drove the creature away. But others weren't so lucky. Shortly after that, a 14-year-old named Jean Boulet was taken out and partially consumed. The attacks were officially underway, and absolute panic gripped the countryside. And here's why. The locals quickly realized this creature had a very, very chilling modus operandi. Its targets? Primarily women and children, though a lone man was occasionally fair game. But what truly set this apart from a normal wolf attack were the specific attack zones. This beast deliberately targeted the victim's head and neck areas. It was consistently executing these brutal decapitation-style tactics before feeding. People started asking themselves, what kind of natural animal consistently chooses to decapitate its prey? It was so disturbing that rumors actually started spreading that maybe a human serial killer or a cannibal was hiding out in the woods. Part 2, the monarchy intervenes. Because suddenly, a nation is in panic. Now, while the body count was rising out in the country, the political stakes were skyrocketing over in Paris. You see, France had just taken some massive, humiliating losses in the disastrous 7 Years' War. They lost overseas colonies to the British, and public morale was basically at rock bottom. Now, the French people, as history tells us, love a good revolution. The nobility realized that if they couldn't even protect local farmers from wild animals, it was going to be a massive blow to the monarchy's legitimacy. King Louis XV desperately needed a PR victory to show he was still strong. So to regain control of the narrative, the state slapped an absolutely massive bounty on this creature's head. It eventually climbed to 6,000 livres. That sheer desperation turned this local tragedy into a global media sensation. I'm talking newspapers from Boston to Brussels covering the story of this unknown monster. And with that kind of cash on the table, a flood of military men, mercenaries, and professional hunters absolutely swarmed Gévaudan, looking for glory and gold. Let's just walk through this parade of detectives the king sent in to stop the carnage. First up, late 1764, we get Captain Duhamel and his dragoons. But weirdly enough, the local farmers were totally uncooperative and kept stalling his efforts, so he failed. Next, early 1765, the king sends in the Denevals, a professional father-son wolf-hunting duo armed with 8 trained bloodhounds. They spent 4 months killing standard Eurasian wolves, but the human death toll just kept right on climbing. At this point, the king was historically deeply embarrassed. So, in a move of pure desperation, he pulls them out and sends in his personal heavy hitter in mid-1765, François Antoine, the king's sole bearer and lieutenant of the hunt.
Which brings us to part 3, false triumphs, because the nightmare wasn't quite over.
So the king's heavy hitter, Francois Antoine, arrives on the scene. He uses the exact same brute force hunting methods as the guys before him, just scouring the woods. But in September of 1765, he actually seems to pull it off. The royal court in Paris throws a massive celebration. Bounties get paid out, and Antoine is paraded around as a national hero. But let's look at the actual forensic dimensions of the animal he killed. On September 20th, he shot this massive gray wolf. The behemoth was 5 feet 7 inches long and weighed roughly 130 pounds. That is significantly larger than your standard European wolf. Antoine officially went on record saying he'd never seen a wolf that could even be compared to this one. And crucially, this animal had deep scars all over its body from knives and bayonets, which perfectly matched reports from brave villagers who had fought the beast off with makeshift weapons earlier that year. So they stuff the giant wolf, ship it off to Versailles, and the king declares the case officially closed. But here comes the horrific plot twist. On December 2nd, 1765, literally just months after all the celebrations, 2 young boys, aged 6 and 12, are brutally attacked in the woods. The older boy barely managed to fight the thing off to save the younger one. And over a dozen more fatal attacks quickly followed. The beast had returned. But because the French government had already claimed their massive public relations victory, the royal court completely ignored these new attacks. They insisted the beast was dead, end of story, and refused to send any more help. The locals were completely abandoned, left on their own again until 1767.
Part 4. Profiling the usual suspects. It's time to play detective.
So if that giant wolf Antoine killed wasn't the sole culprit, what on earth was? To figure this out, we have to shift into profiling mode. Obviously, 18th century locals didn't know much about exotic biology and naturally leaned towards mythical monsters. But today, we can use deductive reasoning to objectively look at the prevailing theories based on the actual evidence. Let's methodically rule out the usual suspects. First, rabies wolves. A rabies outbreak would be terrifying, sure, but none of the victims who survived the bites ever contracted rabies. So that completely eliminates that theory. Second, a human serial killer or cannibal. Look, humans can be terrible, but multiple times this beast took direct musket volleys at point-blank range, shook off the shock, and just bolted back into the forest. A guy in a fursuit cannot survive that. Finally, werewolves. Superstition was everywhere back then, but scientifically, we know that's a no-go. So what biological creature actually fits this bizarre forensic data? Part 5. The escaped lion theory. A shockingly plausible hypothesis.
Okay, to find a biological creature that actually fits the data, surviving musket fire, having immense physical power, and targeting highly specific attack zones, we have to look outside the native animals of France. And the leading modern hypothesis is that the beast of Gévaudan was actually an escaped lion. Before you dismiss that, let's look at their hunting mechanics. Lions are ambush predators. They rely on stealth and surprise to conserve energy. Now, connect this directly back to the beast's specific MO we talked about earlier. When a lion strikes, it intuitively goes straight for the throat to crush the windpipe. And get this, a lion can exert up to 650 pounds per square inch of bite force. When you apply that kind of immense pressure, combined with violent jerking motions to a thin human neck, it naturally causes the exact decapitation-style trauma that terrified those villagers. It is literally a perfect forensic match.
Now, you might be wondering, how does a lion end up in 18th century France? Let's build the profile. Eyewitnesses said the beast looked like a wolf, but with a strange, flat face and a weird, mohawk-like stripe on its back. Well, subadult male lions don't have fully developed manes yet. They often just have a ridge of hair down their spine. To a French farmer who has never seen a big cat in his life, that looks awfully wolf-like. As for how it got there, the colonial pet trade. Wealthy nobles loved importing exotic cubs, but as those cubs grew into highly dangerous young adults, they either escaped or were deliberately released into the wild. And here is the real kicker. Young male lions are known to travel and hunt in pairs. That perfectly explains why eyewitnesses kept reporting seeing 2 beasts and why attacks seem to happen simultaneously in totally different regions. Even famous historical cases, like the man-eaters of Tsava over in Africa, prove that pairs of lions will absolutely hunt down humans as prey. Ultimately, a local nobleman named Marquis d'Epcher organized one final hunt in 1767. A local man named Jean Chastel shot a massive creature, and that finally ended the attacks for good. When they cut the beast open, they actually found human remains inside. But frustratingly, those remains were eventually lost to history.
meaning we have zero genetic material or forensic DNA evidence left to test today. All we have are the context clues left behind in the historical record. So what do you think? Was it an impossibly large mutant wolf? Or, as the forensic evidence strongly suggests, was it a pair of escaped subadult lions hunting in the European woods? The terror of being hunted by the unknown is a deep, primal fear. And perhaps the greatest horror of the beast of Gévaudan is that we may never truly know exactly what was hunting them.